I've got another Bible study tip for you. This is actually going to be number 8. It would be number 7, but I accidentally made 2 number 6s. So anyway, but this one is going to be called exegesis versus eisogesis. Those terms may be very unfamiliar to you. So we'll talk about what those mean and then we'll jig in. So the word eisogesis, exegesis, right? They're 2 Greek terms. Ex means out of, and then eis, E-I-S, means to come into or to put into. And the word Jesus basically is interpretation or, generating, pulling information, or gathering information, if you will. Exegesis is where you let the text that you're reading, obviously in context, we're talking about the Bible, but even lawyers and, judges and that sort of nature, they have to do the same with laws. But exegesis is where you read the text using the grammar rules, and the interpretation rules of any sort of text, and you let it teach you. You don't come to it with a bias. You don't come thinking, I want this thing to be true, so I'm going to go and cherry pick and look for that. But you let it teach you. Eisogesis is the opposite. It is where you come and you say, I really want to see if I can find such and such. Therefore, I'm going to look through the Bible and I'm going to try to find verses that come similar to that. And I'm going to put my own bias, my own interpretation into the text so then I can go and say, haha, look. You can generally see this happen when you see somebody take a text or passages of Scripture and to make them mean something totally different than what the Bible actually means for them to say or to teach. One of the biggest examples, and I firmly believe this is why Jesus warns about it so much at the end of Matthew and why we read so many warnings about this in the epistles. But if I had $1 for every time that I came across somebody or some people claiming that they can tell you when Jesus is coming back based on all sorts of witchcraft, mysticism, and numerology that they eisegetically get from the Bible, I would be beyond rich right now. What I'm talking about is when people go and take certain passages in Scripture and they'll take meanings of numbers that God never intended to place in there. And they'll say, look, if you do this math, if you go here and you look at this secret thing over here and you do this, and this actually means this, you'll arrive at, and they'll give you a number. They'll give you an exact year sometimes. Even though Jesus specifically says nobody knows the time or the place, and there's a lot more emphasis on being ready now, living in the kingdom now, preaching the gospel now, than sitting there on your roof in your pajamas waiting for God to come back. And what they'll do is they'll take you to passages like 2 Peter 3, and they'll say, look, it says, for the Lord, 1,000 years is a day is 1,000 years, they're equal. And what they're doing from our American English 2024 eyes, they'll look at that and they'll say, that means that a day literally equals 1,000 years to God. So when God says he'll come back or rise up on the 3rd day, and they'll take that and they'll give it some sort of a mystical meaning, and they'll say, well, that equals 3,000 years. So they'll do the math and they'll say sometime in, the millennia that we're in right now, Jesus is coming back to reign for his 1,000-year reign. The biggest issue with that is to the Hebrew and the Greek during that time, the word 1,000 was the highest number that they counted up to. They didn't use million like we do. So when they would use 1,000, or sometimes you would see the word legion in the Bible, that was to say it is highly in number. It was high in number. It was almost innumerable. Thousands. So when they say to God, a day is 1,000 years, what that's saying is that God is outside of time. 1 Samuel 18, you remember where it says the famous quote, right? Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Do you think they really kept track to the exact number? No. They're saying they killed a ton of people. They're going up to the max number. In Matthew 26, when Jesus was getting arrested, remember they had the 600 plus soldiers come for him in the garden, and Jesus responds back and he says, do you think I cannot now pray to my Father and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? Again, legion was about 1,000. What Jesus is saying is, I have way more soldiers at my disposal than your entire Roman guard. Don't tempt me. I can do this, but I am choosing not to. But again, that specific word, legion, we're talking 1,000, he didn't say millions, he says 1,000. When John in Revelation 5, when he sees into heaven, John looks around and he hears the voice of many angels, and what does he say? And the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. If that doesn't prove the point that the word 1,000 isn't literal, then at this point you're doing eisogesis on purpose. You want the Bible to say something that it doesn't. Real quick, I just wanted to take a quick detour and share something that I thought was funny. So I was editing the captions on this video, and it's funny because if you don't edit your captions on TikTok videos, sometimes you end up saying some wild stuff. But notice when I said exegesis, notice what it put there, Exogesis. That's interesting because Jesus himself is the greatest teacher at exegetical teaching. God works in mysterious ways, because I meant to mention that on this video and I forgot to. And lo and behold, it's right there in the captions. Anyways, back to your regular programming. And furthermore, if you go back to that passage in 2 Peter about 1 day is 1,000 years, if you look at the actual context and you do exegesis, you'll notice that what Peter is telling us is that we're not to base our expectation of God's judgment based on how long it's been, how much time has passed by. That's why he says God is not slack in his judgment. He's saying, like, God is outside of time. He will act according to his nature when he decides to act. It's not up to us to say, oh, well, they've been going at it for 5 or 10 years, God, it's now the time. That's not how God decides it. Let the Bible teach you. Don't try to put your own stuff into the Bible. One thing that you will notice is that in the entirety of Scripture, God never asks man for his input on God's commands and laws. Have you ever seen anywhere in the Bible where God asks man for his opinion on how God should deliver and organize his laws? Absolutely not. Why do we think that would start now? Read the Bible, study the Bible, let the Bible teach you. And if you come at it with a bias, you will most likely be looking to confirm that bias. But when you come across something that is challenging, let the Bible interpret itself. Go to other passages that talk about that subject, because the Bible never contradicts itself. That's why we have what's called the analogy of faith in theology, which teaches that the Bible never contradicts itself, but it backs itself up. It supports itself with itself. I hope that this helped you. Again, you come across somebody trying to claim they know exactly when Jesus is coming back, ignore them, because they're wrong. God bless you. I hope this helped. More to come.